J.P. Morgan possessed an extraordinary combination of wealth, power, and influence. He was the owner of the first billion-dollar company and held a dominant position in the most profitable industries in the country. His actions often had a direct impact on the entire U.S. economy, and with a single word or a stroke of a pen, he could rescue a company from collapse or send it into bankruptcy. While he was both admired and hated by different individuals, J.P. Morgan's story is unique and there will never be another man quite like him. John Pierpont Morgan, born into privilege in Connecticut in 1837, had a father named Junior Spencer Morgan, who was already a wealthy banker. Junior ensured that John had the best education money could buy, with the hope that John would follow in his footsteps as a financier. Despite growing up in wealth, John's childhood was bleak due to his poor health. He suffered from various ailments such as coughing fits, migraines, seizures, and diseases like scarlet fever, which often kept him indoors and unable to play with other children. At one point, John even had rheumatic fever and was sent by his father to live alone on the Azure Islands in the Atlantic Ocean for almost a year, with the belief that the climate and salty air would help him recover. By 1857, at the age of 19, John had studied in Boston, Switzerland, and Germany and was ready to enter the workforce. His father, who was a junior partner at a London-based merchant banking firm called George Peabody & Co., helped John get a job on Wall Street in the banking firm that looked after Peabody's interests in America. One of John's responsibilities was to write reports to his father's firm detailing financial and political developments in America, which was still an emerging market at that time. From an early age, John's father had concerns about his son's rash and hot-tempered nature, and he believed that John needed to learn restraint and responsibility to become a successful financier. One example of John's risk-taking behavior was in 1859, when he used company money to purchase an entire shipment of Brazilian coffee that arrived in port without a buyer, which was seen as reckless by the senior members of the banking house. Despite making a profit from selling the coffee, John's risk-taking behavior was not well received. And in 1861, at the age of 24, he left the safety and security of the established firm to start his own company, which continued to act as an agent for his father's bank in England. It was also the year when John married his first love, Amelia Sturgis. But their happiness was short-lived as Amelia fell ill with tuberculosis shortly after their wedding. John took her on an extended honeymoon to the Mediterranean in the hope of restoring her health, but she died just 4 months after their wedding, leaving John devastated at the age of 24. This loss drove John to immerse himself even more in his work. During this time, the United States was going through the American Civil War, and the 1863 Conscription Act should have required John to enlist in the military. However, he paid $300 to be exempted from enlisting and had a substitute stand in his place. Despite not being directly involved in the war, John profited greatly from it. For example, he financed the purchase of 5,000 surplus whole carbine rifles from the government for $3.50 each, which were considered too old to use. The consortium that bought the rifles made minor adjustments and then sold them back to the government for $22 each, resulting in over a 600% increase in price. While this war profiteering was controversial and unpopular with the public and government, it was a lucrative deal for John to be involved in. However, these controversies related to his risk-taking behavior and war profiteering were just the beginning of the challenges John would face in his life. In 1871, John recognized a golden opportunity to collaborate with one of the leading financiers in the country, a banker named Anthony Drexel. Together, they founded the Drexel Morgan & Co., a private merchant banking house, which later became J.P. Morgan & Co. This firm would be John's lifelong venture and serve as a precursor to the modern banking giant known as J.P. Morgan Chase. During the early stages of his career, John primarily facilitated deals by connecting wealthy investors and visionaries for a share of the profits. However, as he built a bigger personal fortune and reputation, he was able to finance many projects on his own. John had already identified his first major investment opportunity, the American railroad system. At that time, most other big industries were dominated by single magnates, such as Carnegie in steel and Rockefeller in oil. However, the railroad industry was different as there were numerous competing companies offering similar routes, resulting in price slashing to win customers. While many saw this as fierce competition, John saw opportunity in consolidation. He believed that merging railroads together rather than competing was the answer. John understood that larger businesses could benefit from economies of scale. His strategy was to turn multiple small companies into a unified conglomerate. By doing so, they could avoid competing against each other, set favorable prices, and gain control over nearby railroads. John made significant investments in multiple railroads and began consolidating them. He would take over and finance struggling railroad companies, streamline their management and operational efficiency, and merge smaller companies into one dominant player that could eliminate any remaining competitors, which he would then acquire as well. This tactic, known as Morganization, was named after John due to its great effectiveness. What set John apart from other businessmen and investors of his time was his proactive role in corporate management. He was not content with simply buying shares and sitting back to collect profits. He craved control and actively used his influential position on the board of directors to direct the companies as he saw fit. He would often reshuffle leadership positions in different railroad companies to his liking and assemble them into monopolies with himself at the helm. When railroad companies sought his help, John would refuse unless he was given full control. This not only gave him the power he desired, but also created a more stable industry, which in turn attracted more investments from Europe. Money flowed into US railroad companies as they appeared more consolidated and stable, thanks to John's efforts further increasing his wealth. John constantly sought to outdo his previous achievements and be more ambitious. For example, he purchased 250,000 shares of stock from William Vanderbilt in one of the most prominent railways in the country, the New York Central Railroad. The following year, he executed the largest transaction in railroad bonds ever made in the United States, underwriting the sale of $40 million in bonds to finance the completion of the Northern Pacific Railroad. Before long, John owned one-third of all the railroad lines in America at a time when the majority of the stock market capitalization consisted of railroad companies, and in other words, John was no longer just a wealthy financier, but he was actively shaping railroad conglomerates and heavily involved in reorganizations and mergers, further growing his power and wealth. His reputation as a formidable industry titan grew, matched by his intimidating appearance. John suffered from a skin condition called rosacea, which caused redness and ruptured blood vessels on his nose, making it disfigured. He also had rhinophyma, which enlarged his nose and covered it in pimples. Despite being self-conscious about his appearance and getting angry at being photographed, John always ordered portraits to be redone to make his nose look more normal, which is why it's less noticeable in pictures of him. However, his striking facial features combined with his tall stature and aggressive way of speaking made John an intimidating presence. In 1901, John faced opposition from President Theodore Roosevelt, who took issue with John's monopolistic practices. Roosevelt ordered the Justice Department to file a suit against John's newly formed holding company, the Northern Securities Corporation, for violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. While John fought the lawsuit in court, the company was ultimately dissolved. This marked the beginning of a tense relationship between John and Roosevelt. Despite the setback, John was already planning his next move, which he considered even more audacious. During the height of Carnegie Steel's dominance in the steel industry and its status as one of the most valuable companies in the country, its founder, Andrew Carnegie, was ready to retire and sell his company. John, however, stepped in and offered to buy Carnegie Steel at Carnegie's requested price of $480 million, which was the highest amount ever paid for a business deal at that time. John even admitted later that he would have paid $100 million more. This landmark purchase took place in 1901, but it was just the beginning of John's ambitious plan. John proceeded to merge Carnegie Steel with Federal Steel Company and other businesses to form U.S. Steel, which became the world's first billion-dollar corporation with a market capitalization of $1.4 billion. To put this in perspective, the total capitalization of all manufacturing in the country at that time was only $9 billion. This deal gave John control over approximately two-thirds of American steel production, effectively conquering one of the largest industries of that time. Not stopping there, John also provided financial support for Thomas Edison's early experiments with electricity and played a key role in merging Edison Electric with its competitors to create General Electric. John's talent for combining and transforming companies into unstoppable giants was unparalleled. However, despite his success, a crisis was looming on the horizon. In 1893, the United States experienced a severe depression unlike anything seen before. After decades of continuous growth and unchecked investments, the economic bubble burst, plunging the American economy into chaos. Stock prices plummeted, businesses closed down, banks went bankrupt, and unemployment rates soared across the country. The crisis also led to foreign investors cashing in their American bonds for gold, depleting the U.S. reserves. At the time, the dollar was tied to the gold standard, allowing anyone to convert paper money into physical gold, which instilled confidence in the value of the currency. As a result, the U.S. government maintained at least $100 million worth of gold bullion to back the dollar. However, by 1895, most of that gold was gone, and the dollar's value was rapidly declining. The government had as little as $9 million worth of gold reserves, putting it at risk of defaulting on its loans at any moment. This further fueled panic among investors, leading to a run on gold and depleting the reserves even further. With no central bank in place to rescue the situation, the crisis was dire. President Cleveland recognized that this was a critical moment for America that could change its course forever. This traditional strategy of simply selling more bonds to the American people was not sufficient, and John understood that drastic and immediate action was needed. He traveled to Washington to meet with the president and present his plan to bring America back from the brink of economic disaster. John's audacious scheme was to form a private syndicate comprising the most prominent bankers in the country who would work alongside foreign investors to strengthen America's gold reserves. John's syndicate offered to purchase $65 million worth of 30-year gold bonds using 3.5 million ounces of gold. Thanks to an old Civil War statute, President Cleveland could immediately approve the deal without waiting for Congress approval. Once Cleveland signed the agreement, John instructed his team in New York to act, and within 22 minutes, they bought out all the gold bonds. John's decisive actions had immediate calming effect on the volatile financial market and restored confidence in the economy. While John had saved the government from a total collapse, some raised concerns about the vast influence and power of one single banker on the entire U.S. economy, and questioned his motivations as either patriotic or opportunistic. During the next election, John and his banker friends donated heavily to the Republican nominee who won, allowing John to maintain his close ties with the government. This was not the only time John played a crucial role in stabilizing the American economy. In 1907, the country faced another severe financial crisis, with several banks on the verge of bankruptcy and people rushing to withdraw their money from banks. President Roosevelt, despite his differences with John, recognized the gravity of the situation, and both agreed that government and big business needed to work together to save the country from a depression. Roosevelt called on J.P. Morgan once again to help salvage the situation. John's approach was to allocate substantial funds where they were most needed. He called upon numerous influential financiers and leaders of major banks and trusts to gather in his private library on Madison Avenue, where they discussed and decided on the best course of action. John's plan involved investing in smaller banks to prevent their bankruptcy, while acknowledging that some banks would inevitably fail. He and his associates deposited large sums of money in several banks, enabling them to pay their depositors and avoid insolvency. After presenting his plan, John locked the door and kept the bankers in until they reached a resolution. But the next morning, everyone had agreed to John's plan, and with Roosevelt's approval, the U.S. Treasury also contributed $25 million, showcasing the trust and respect the president had for John's business acumen. Remarkably, John was 70 years old at the time and negotiated all of this while suffering from a severe cold, constantly coughing and sneezing while saving the U.S. economy. Ultimately, John's plan succeeded. Capital was infused back into the economy, public confidence was restored in America's banking system, and another economic catastrophe was averted thanks to John's astute maneuvering. However, this also highlighted how reliant the nation had become on one individual, and calls for change began to arise shortly after John was initially hailed as a hero. John faced increasing scrutiny as the era of unregulated business practices, reminiscent of the robber baron era, was fading away. The American public was growing weary of a few businessmen wielding immense power and influence. John was summoned to testify before the Peugeot Committee, which sought to investigate the extent of Wall Street's money trust and its role in the American economy. He was prominently featured during the hearings and became the face of Wall Street's power. Despite his financial success, John's mental state deteriorated, experiencing multiple nervous breakdowns and struggling to cope with the negative portrayal of him in the media. Ironically, John was supposed to board the Titanic for its maiden voyage, but had to cancel at the last moment due to health issues. Meanwhile, the Peugeot Committee's investigation paved the way for the establishment of the Federal Reserve, as it became evident that relying solely on a handful of wealthy and powerful individuals to fix the economy was not sustainable. However, John did not live to see the repercussions of the investigation, as he passed away on March 31, 1913, while on vacation in Rome at the age of 75. After his death, John's son took over the business and continued its expansion. Over the years, the bank underwent numerous acquisitions and mergers, including notable ones with Bank One and Chase Bank, resulting in the creation of J.P. Morgan Chase in 2000 with an estimated $3 trillion in assets. Even in present times, concerns remain about the bank's level of power and influence. With a history of consolidation in the banking industry spanning 200 years, J.P. Morgan Chase is currently the largest bank in the world by market capitalization. While opinions may vary on John Pierpont Morgan, there is no denying that his legacy continues to endure. And that's a wrap for today's episode. We hope you enjoyed learning about the incredible facts and stories we shared on our channel. If you're hungry for more amazing knowledge, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our latest videos. Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and be amazed by the world around you.